All right. I think we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, my next and last guest of the year on the CMO Asia Podcast will be my Austin, Texas buddy, Jesse McDonald, Global SEO Strategist at IBM, who is also the biggest metal fan you'll ever meet. And explains why he's wearing a Mayhem t-shirt, whereas I'm wearing a Slayer t-shirt today.
Oh, very nice.
Very nice, right? So just gonna tell our audience, you're like the biggest metal fan that they will also ever meet. And both of us will probably allocate the last 30 minutes of this live podcast, shouting out our favorite metal bands out individually during the live stream, and say a big thank you to all these amazing artists that accompanied all of us through this cursed year, right? And providing me oxygen and life support playlists as well during my earlier hospitalization stay. So how are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm very good. I'm about to really kick off my holiday break, which is exciting. So I'm actually ending my work year with you as well, my friend.
Fantastic. So this is what, the day 1 or 2 into your holidays already?
Technically day 2. I've had a couple of end of year meetings, so day and a half, I guess.
So you must be really enjoying it. I'm seeing that smile on your face. So
yeah, I like what I do.
It's probably still quite early over there. In Singapore, it's already 3 a.m. On the Saturday weekend. What time is it over there in Austin?
It's 1 in the afternoon.
Okay, maybe too early to be toasting you with a glass of wine. Maybe
a little early for that, but we'll get into that later.
Later on, yeah, okay. So we're gonna, maybe tell our friends over at LinkedIn, right? Because it's streamed live to LinkedIn as well. Some have actually signed up for this particular live podcast, and they're all looking forward to this particular episode because it's about marketing, it's about search engine optimization, technology, 2020 recap, and of course, we'll talk maybe a little bit about Google's fight against spam and misleading information, a little bit about digital marketing topics, and segue into metal music later on in the show. Yeah, so let's start out with the biggie. What was your prediction for 2020 last year around this time? And recently Lily Ray, right, posted something really interesting on LinkedIn. She was looking for examples of like tech and marketing predictions we had last year for 2020 that turned out to be blatantly wrong because, well, 2020 happened, right? So we'd love to hear what are your thoughts?
So for me, within the SEO space and kind of the work that I was doing at the time, end of last year, and I think I sent this over to Search Engine Journal as my contribution to their wrap up for last year, that I thought more people would put more of a focus on site architecture and topic mapping and topic silos, things like that. And I believe, honestly, I don't know. I mean, for us, it came true. We kept working with that. That kind of became the base of what we did in 2020 at IBM. But I'm not necessarily sure if that came to fruition outside of the company. I know, it's obviously always a topic within SEO, but I don't know if it was something that I would say was a gigantic factor. I know there are a bunch of people within the SEO space, within the kind of frequent conference speakers, that sort of crowd, that did put a heavy focus on intent modeling and topic mapping and topic silos and general site structure type stuff. So I don't know if I would say that it came true or if it didn't come true. I think it's just one of those things that's always there. It's just a matter of how much attention did it get.
Right. So you were also mentioning something about conferences and all this speaking engagement, right? So maybe this is actually a good time to actually send our condolences to one of our colleagues, abut. I think 24 hours ago, his son passed away, right? So he's someone that we met, I think, at the PopCon conference in Las Vegas, I think a year and a month ago, I think. So just to let him know that, our thoughts goes out to him and his family. And how did you learn about this piece of news as well? Was it on social media?
So I've known Elmer for a while. We've been connected for a long time. He used to live in Austin. So Funny enough, we only really saw each other throughout the year at PubCon in Las Vegas, but he lived very close to where I live. But actually, I had him on my podcast to record a couple weeks ago, because we don't do live. We just record it and then put it out. And we talked about it a little bit, because he also lost a son a couple weeks ago as well. So I had a little bit of I guess, the information beforehand that this was kind of expected. So I can't even fathom. As a new father myself this year, I can't even imagine losing my child, let alone 2 within a couple months span. So my heart definitely goes out to Elmer and all of his family. I can't imagine. So all the best.
I think you put it, very apt way that, we're all shocked by the news, right? So these days we are mostly hanging out and living in Facebook and social media. Totally. So I think this will probably lead to the next question about Google, right? And on Facebook, just sharing an experience that I had yesterday. I was putting up a post about Fauci, Dr. Fauci, yeah? He was voted the Guardian of the Year on the Time magazine.
Totally.
So, of course, when I put up a post like that, right, normally you have the haters, and of course you have the people who admire and respect of Dr. Fauci, right? So some of the comments that came out when I put up this particular news about Times Magazine voting Dr. Fauci as Guardian of the Year, there are some haters, obviously, who actually commented on the post and said things like, maybe I'm going to just read these, okay, some of these comments, because it will probably lead to our next question about misleading information, right? For example, the Guardian of the scam, one of the creators of this big scam or pandemic that took out our freedoms and sent millions into poverty. This guy must be jailed. So this happens on social media quite commonly, right? Do you face, this sort of hate speech as well, or comments that are, littering your posts on social? Do you see that a lot?
Social media is a really interesting thing for me. It's in my roles as an SEO, it's not something that I've dived into professionally per se, but it's been a huge help for me as far as my personal brand goes, and was a big part of me meeting a lot of the people that I kind of consider my industry family, and are a big part of, why I kind of started speaking at conferences. So I don't necessarily get a lot of that on my posts, but at the same time, I don't really kind of go into the political realm or kind of sharing of news world. I kind of try to take my posts as a sharing of positivity. So I share a lot about my kid and my family, just because, with that smile, you couldn't, feel bad looking at it. So I try to make sure, especially because so many people that I care about didn't get to meet her this year, that they at least get to see her as much as possible, and it kind of gets some level of distraction, because it's a reality. This whole pandemic, because it's such a global thing, it's a reality that you can't, ignore no matter what. But if you can shine some positivity in people's life, absolutely. Then paired with that, as you know, I'm a big fan of sharing music with everyone, even though, I have a very distinct taste in music that I don't think a lot of people particularly enjoy. Besides the few like you and our friend like Danny Goodwin. But I like to share music as much as possible, so that the people that do kind of like what I enjoy either can expand their horizons or be reminded of a song that they haven't thought of in a while. So I don't get too terribly much of the negative comments on social media. And then I typically kind of don't find myself over on Twitter anymore. Every now and then I do, but it's like shouting into the void and doesn't have a huge return. So it's a weird thing for me, and especially now having a kid and just trying to kind of keep myself lifted up. I don't particularly find myself on social media as much as I used to.
I'm super glad, they are always sharing positive information on social. So for me, positive information is a great playlist recommendation, like the one that you curated for me, right? Songs for Wayne when I was hospitalized earlier this year. And that particular playlist has actually accompanied me through, really dark times when I'm not even sure whether it will last throughout the end of the year. So, of course, what I mentioned earlier, it's like the reality is that Facebook has a really tough time clamping down on the opinions of the other half. And of course, in terms of the challenge that big tech firms are facing these days, right, with misinformation, with spam and all that. Facebook had a hard time. So obviously Google has a even harder time in terms of like clamping down on all this misinformation. So I think this is a question that is especially prepared for you because you're the best person in the position, to answer this particular next question, right? How is Google's fight against misleading information different from misinformation? I think maybe you could help us out by maybe clarifying or even defining these two different terms between misleading and misinformation. That obviously, people who search for certain information, right? They'll normally be brought to a website and they will see the information that they probably want or the kind of quality information they want to derive from it. And then they will probably, be even more knowledgeable about a certain topic. And they will then go to online or social media like Facebook and to maybe, point out things that they think is wrong. Like what I experienced yesterday when someone pointed out that Dr. Fauci is a scam artist when Time Magazine actually says that he's a guardian of the year, right? Yeah. So you have to clarify this part for us.
I think one of the big distinguishing factors is that you have to look at the information that you're reading and determine if it is backed by data, which, I mean, in all forms of tech and digital marketing, data is kind of the king and queen of what you do. You absolutely need it to make informed decisions. Without that, it's just anecdotal and based on feeling, which there's an element of that at play. There's always going to be an element of feeling and kind of that gut intuition. But if the more you can back it up with data, the more substantial of a decision it is. Same thing goes with anything, kind of in this pandemic political climate in general, is that if there's no data behind it, then it's 100% a feeling and it's misleading. Or if it takes data and kind of tries to interpret that, push it into its own sort of agenda, then it's more of a misinformation type of a thing. So I guess the real distinction is there data behind it? And then how is that data being used? And that's where a lot of times the content writing teams on a website and the SEO need to kind of take a look at what data they actually have when creating content and determining if it is actually substantiated by actual data and not, carrying any sort of bias or anything like that. And I think the election in the US has been a big kind of tell of how a lot of different people in our society interpret data and actually rely on data to make informed decisions.
Absolutely. And so if a website is found to be spreading misinformation about, let's say, for example, COVID-19 vaccines, right? So do you think that they shouldn't even be in Google's index at all in this case, just like how, certain misinformation were being spread during the election time?
That's a really interesting thing that I haven't necessarily really taken time to think about. But I mean, I think that's where you kind of draw this like weird line where you have to go, is it misinformation and should be censored? Or are we moving into a place where that's a dangerous level of censorship? Who makes that judgment? Where's the line drawn? I think where, like a Twitter or something like that, and while some would argue it's taken them a little too long to get this way, labeling something as not being factual or not being backed by data as best you can, I think that is a great starting place to say, this piece of content's out in the world, you can look at it and you can choose to follow it if you like, but do know that there's nothing here that is actually backed by any sort of data that can lead to the conclusion that it is factual information. But at the same time, taking it completely off the index itself, I think starts moving into somewhat of a dangerous territory. And my personal feelings, if you could take ethics completely out of it, my God, it would be great to not have a bunch of misleading, incorrect crap on the internet, but that's not my call. That's kind of toying with the thought of free speech and ethics. So I think having it on there, everyone should be able to express themselves and publish whatever they want. But if it's not backed by data and it's making claims, then it should be labeled as non-factual so that the user can make that decision.
100%. So how about concepts like EAT for dealing with misinformation? Do you think that is futile of the algorithm to actually use the concepts like EAT for dealing with all this misinformation? Maybe for the benefit of the CMOs who are tuning in, right, who doesn't really understand what EAT, concept is all about. Can you maybe explain in layman terms for them?
So EAT, you'll also obviously hear it referred to as EAT, but it stands for expertise, authority, and trust. And basically what that is saying is that it takes a look at a website itself. It looks at what level of expertise it has in given subjects or topics, like we talked about earlier. Then kind of helps build the authority of that topic itself based on the amount of content and informative content that is being produced by the website and the authors of said website on said topics, and then builds like a level of trust in it. And this is something that our mutual friend Lily Ray is big into, and to the point where the content that she's producing on EAT is actually being referenced by Google itself. So that should tell you that there's some level of actual, expertise, authority, and trust from her on the subject itself. And that's kind of my understanding on it. So that's something that I always look at whenever kind of looking at content for the sites that I worked on in the past, site I work on now, is how can we build up an authority in a general topic? Is there a gap that we're missing? Is there some sort of new element to the content that we're writing that we need to write about further to expand on this topic itself? And I think that's a great way to start. If someone's producing content outside of their realm of expertise based on what they have on a site or, even on social media or whatever, then that could be a huge factor in the ranking possibilities and indexability of the site itself and the content itself. So I think that's a good starting place.
You explained that really well. And of course, we have already given Lily Ray 2 shout outs in the show already. She was actually on my podcast, I think last year, in fact, during a PubCon in Las Vegas. I think she dropped by and we had a booth at the time, a podcast booth at PubCon in Las Vegas. So she just walked past and sat down and did a podcast with me together where we really talk about EAT, in depth. So we're gonna, seize this opportunity to ask you more questions, especially in terms of search engine optimization, right? What exactly is the difference between how Google treats spam and misinformation?
That's interesting. So it from my understanding of it, it takes a look at what is actually being written, the commonalities between multiple sites that are ranking for those terms to determine obviously where something should rank, and then looking at things obviously that aren't cited. Because realistically, if you look at a web page, because especially with backlinks, this is the analogy that I've always kind of used to explain it. So a web page is basically like you're writing a piece, like an essay for college or university. Then the linking aspect of it is where you're citing your references for the piece itself. If you don't cite anything, then more than likely you're not necessarily a credible source unless you are creating the content itself. So if it's like a research piece or something like that, granted, there should probably be some level of citation in there regardless. Then that is how the citation builds authority to point A back to point B, which is you. And then where you link out to, as you're building authority for that piece of content, you're becoming the citation kind of standard type of a thing. So granted, that's kind of a very baseline, broad stroke sort of way of describing it. But I think the same kind of applies to misinformation going out into the web, is that if it's not following kind of the standard for that topic itself and is clearly not based on some sort of new level of research or anything like that, then it's going to have a much harder time, much more difficult time appearing in search, be it towards the top of rankings or even for a sustained amount of time, because it could get through. There are anomalies in search all the time. It's not this like infallible thing. There's always a way that someone's going to manipulate their way to the top. It's a matter of, will it sustain and actually be looked at as valuable content for that topic and that query itself.
So I think it's great that you clarify that for us, right? I think bottom line is that protecting maybe a user's life or health should always take a higher precedence than maybe punishing link buyers, right? And of course, yes. I think Google's Danny Sullivan recently also articulated an article that I think he insisted that Google is not turning a blind eye to misinformation. But he's like reaffirming that Google's commitment is to show useful information in the search engine result pages, right?
Totally. Totally. And I mean, I think they have an opportunity right now to really define their ethics, especially because their, original motto was to do no evil. And that's kind of come into question in the last, 10 years or so. So now's a real opportunity to kind of put those words into effect and show that they don't intend to do evil if they truly don't intend to. So they have an opportunity to define those ethics publicly and outwardly in how they represent search. So, and I'm glad I'm not in that decision seat. Like, that's tough. That's really tough.
Let's move on quickly. I think we started the show by talking about, predictions that we did last year for 2020 that turned out to be blatantly wrong, right? Because COVID happened. So I'm definitely going to ask you, what's your prediction for tech and marketing and SEO for 2021?
So my big one, and I submitted this also for this year's Search Engine Journal wrap up, and was very excited that our buddy Hamlet Batista sent kind of something similar, in that I think automation is going to be key, especially for an in-house role like myself, where it's a gigantic sort of marketing play and it's cross-disciplinary. There's a lot of pages. I think currently in Index, IBM has over 8 million pages in Index itself. And that's not all of it. That's just what happens to be in the base index. So creating scalable solutions to providing recommendations and betterment efforts across the board is key. It's something that my team's looking into. It's something that we're trying to figure out the best way to do it, even if it's just from priorities. How do we prioritize where we work first? Everything needs to be touched, but what would make the most impact right out of the gate? What do we need out in front of the search engines to be crawled so that they can kind of have time to gestate and figure out where they're going to sit, so Google understands what's going on with those pages and the changes that we've made? So it's just kind of automation across the board. And I'm saying that from a very in-house bias perspective. Agencies in-house or agency work is always kind of looking at some level of automation, but it's not necessarily for scalability reasons. It's more for ease. So I think it's really based on business needs, but I'm definitely putting my money on automation next year.
And when we talk about automation, we have to talk about chat bots as well, right? Or even voice search, right? So like this came out a lot last year. How about for next year? Do you think that it is still important for voice search and even chat bots, which I think this year it didn't really take off, right? Because people's preference are for human touch, like when we use WhatsApp or social monitoring. What's your hot take on that?
So I definitely fall into the group where, chatbots and voice search are super important. Like you can't be like ignoring them. They're going to become the future eventually. But right now I kind of sit in this place of it's not here yet. It's more of let's get to that place. And that might just be my perspective on it, because I kind of tend to be a more quiet person where my first thought isn't, oh, let me talk to something and see if it can, give me results or make something happen. That being said, over the past year or so, I've really embraced more of like my Google Home, and I'm sure it's going to go off now. But at the same time, we have it set up to where if my wife asks a question, it's in a certain voice. If I ask a question, it's in a different voice. So you can kind of differentiate between who asked the question. It gets that wrong constantly. Simultaneously, if I ask a question, it will change to the voice that I have mine set to specifically and tell me that it didn't recognize my voice, so it couldn't perform the action, which it wouldn't have changed to my voice setting if it didn't know that. So I don't think voice search is the thing to double down on. It is going to be the thing next year, but it's something to always keep working to implement into your site, implement those best practices so that when it catches, you're already ahead of the game. It's kind of like when the mobile first index hit a couple years ago. Everyone who's been ignoring mobile for years had to scramble, and they had about a year and a half or so before it like really started to finalize rolling out. But they were scrambling to get their mobile best practices in play, whereas people who already had dedicated mobile sites or really went the responsive route were good to go. It wasn't a big deal to them. It was more fine tuning. Don't let yourself get in a place where you're having to scramble. Always be in that place where you're fine tuning later, even if it's not a thing right now.
That's a very good point, because I think for the CMOs who are tuning in, right, either this, listening to this replay on the podcast, on their maybe Google Voice Assistant, smart speakers later on, they are always, looking to be ahead of the curve, right? And it's always great to be prepared. for the inevitability of something like voice search when it really takes off. Like I'm already like, based on my consumption and also how I interact with my smart speaker a lot these days, right? When I listen to podcasts, for example, I'm always frustrated when I can't find the exact episode that I want. Using my smart speakers, but at least, it's capable of giving me the latest Joe Rogan Experience podcast episode correctly every time. So that for me is a godsend. At least I don't have to touch my laptop or turn on my TV or, having to unlock my home screen on my mobile phone just to listen to Joe Rogan. Have his voice fill up my apartment. So that to me is already good enough for 2020, but I expect more next year, like maybe to be able to zoom into certain topic, like, skip the portion of the podcast when Joe Rogan is talking about MMA again, for example, because he always repeats, those MMA
totally. Kettlebells, DMT, you name it, big game hunting. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of just gloss over those at some point.
Yeah, that's why his podcasts are always 3-4 hours long and super long for a lot of people. And guess what? We're almost halfway through, and it's 5 minutes have just gone past like that, just by talking about SEO, marketing predictions. Let's talk about our favorite topic, because I think the thing that connected us in the first place wasn't because we actually attended the same conference in Las Vegas last year. Because I remember I was there, but we never even had a chance to meet.
I don't think we met up. Yes.
Exactly. I'm not sure also how you missed my podcast booth, because we had a huge booth there. So I didn't get a chance to sit down and talk to you, but finally,
totally.
Finally, we get to do this, and I'm so grateful that you're here today. So let me do this, right? This is something that I've never done before. I'm going to just change my background because we're going to zoom in on music.
I love it.
It's like the first time I'm changing, the background as well as the logo of my podcast show. So for those on LinkedIn, right, if metal music is not your pet topic, you can maybe tune out right now. For those who are watching this on Facebook and are very interested, in what we're going to talk about next, because we're going to talk about metal music. It's been an incredible year for metal music. What's your impression of all these great releases that came out during this year, this messed up year of 2020?
So I remember a few years ago when the kind of political climate of the US really shifted. I remember looking at my buddy at my office and being like, oh, music's going to get really good. Music's totally going to get really good over the next few years. And I really think it kind of went that way, especially if you kind of live in the punk hardcore sort of underground that never quit being political. I think that stuff really, really got to shine. But this year, same thing. I think this has really brought out the creativity in a lot of folks. So if you're on, sort of apps like TikTok and things like that, there are people just putting out music left and right, and little snippets of it. So I found a bunch of bands recently that are really good. There's one, what's their name? I found them just the other day. It is Autumn Lies Buried. They are insane.
What's the name of the band again? Sorry.
Autumn Lies Buried. So
Autumn Lies Buried.
So autumn like fall, lies, Lies, buried. Really cool band. A lot of like kind of occult themes in their music. But one of the things that I like the most that really caught my attention is they wrote a song, and they're kind of like in that sort of deathcore sort of vibe. So they have that sound, but they went back and kind of incorporated some more like rap lyrics into one of their songs, just because their lead singer like kind of got some sort of more racial comments thrown at him online. And to combat that, he just doubled down big time and threw in almost this like new element or new metal element into their deathcore sound, which is like super cool. So there's a lot of like really creative, almost responses to political climate, even in that almost subliminal context. That's really interesting to me, and I've seen a lot of that. So yeah, it's been really cool. I haven't had a chance to listen to as much new stuff this year as I normally would. Now she's about 8.5 months old, having a new child in my life has made it kind of difficult to explore more of that new music, but I found myself really doubling down on older stuff that either I only kind of listened to or didn't listen to and give it the chance like I should have. And then through that, that's finding new stuff. So it wouldn't necessarily be considered new this year, but it's new in my life this year, which is super cool. So I've had a lot of fun with that sort of thing this year.
Absolutely. And, I'm like observing the smile on your face. It just lead up the moment we talk about our favorite genre, right, which is metal music. And of course, it's also a very appropriate time to maybe look at, maybe share my screen, right? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to open my Chrome tab and just show everybody, this is like, I'm totally honest here. I'm very transparent with what I listened to this year. And what I listened to this year, it's always, shared on Spotify. I'm not sure whether you can see the screen. Yeah, so it's like Spotify has this huge thing called 2020 Rap, right? So that's basically the platform where I'm able to dive into the playlist that you created for me when I was hospitalized earlier this year and listen to all the great music. So we'll look at the playlist later on that you created. But of course, I'm gonna explore my raps. Later on, you get to do the same as well. You can share your screen and show us your rap results as well. Mine looks like this. And it's interesting that you mentioned about political, right? Themes and, of course, how quickly certain bands are writing lyrics to reflect, the times that we're living in. And, of course, I'm not surprised that my number one top song of 2020 is Mr. Bungle.
I was going to say it's Mr. Bungle.
And we're going to talk about Mr. Bungle later on, yeah, because they probably churn out, the best thrash metal album of the year, in my opinion, of course. Number 2 on the list is Yankee and the Brave by Run the Jewels. So you can tell I love rap music just like you. You were talking fervently about how, there are certain hip hop and rap lyrics and aspects that goes into the metal band that you just recommended us earlier on. So I think Run the Jewels is probably one of the highlights besides all the great metal albums that were released this year, right? Because I think they were the first to actually insert the lyric "I Can't Breathe" in one of the songs in the latest LP that dropped this year, which really resonated with me as much as Mr. Bungle's album, right? So how did rap music get into your playlist as well? Like for me, it all started with the Beastie Boys. How about you?
It's kind of a weird situation for me because that type of music was in my life growing up, not necessarily out of a love for it. There were things that I liked. Like I really enjoyed the early 90s kind of like gangster rap stuff that came out of LA when I was growing up, just because my dad liked it. But then kind of that like late 90s, early 2000s stuff when I was still kind of in middle school, I was living in an area where like if I didn't listen to that, I would have gotten like beaten up a bunch. So it was more of like a fight or flight sort of thing. It wasn't necessarily like creatively stimulating to me like I typically like my music to be. But then later in life, I really, and when I say later, I mean like my mid 20s, I grew really fond of this like new wave of hip hop, which was things like Kendrick Lamar and Childish Gambino and J. Cole, Tyler, the Creator, like stuff that really took what had been built off of from the previous couple of like decade and a half, and kind of flipped it on its head and started questioning like its general aesthetics, and even started bringing more of that like poeticism back into the game, like was really there with like that early 90s type stuff. So that became big for me. So I'm a big Kendrick Lamar fan. I love Childish Gambino. I really like a good portion of what J. Cole does. And then Tyler, the Creator, just blows my mind constantly and is so out there and so bizarre even. Like, I think he would almost fall into a category of some of the kind of like the weirder stuff that you and I listen to. He's doing something very similar in a completely different genre. It's really interesting.
Are you able to share your Spotify Rap 2020 list with us as well? So there's a button below that says share screen, right? Can you click on that? So and I'll add it so that we can look at your list as well. Go ahead.
Okay.
Walk us through. Yeah.
So let's expand a little bit. So my list is a little interesting because I find that I typically go through waves of interests. So for example, I have this playlist that I curate every year for the like month or so leading up to Halloween that I call Spooky Tunes. That is just truly stuff that it kind of captures that weird spooky vibe. So it's a lot of things like Ghost and Typo Negative and Cradle of Filth even, or Marilyn Manson. So a lot of that ended up being a lot of what's in my highlights for the year. There's a lot of Ghost. My wife and I both really enjoy Ghost. But then there's stuff from like Typo
Oh, by
Negative.
the way, you're the singularly, introduced me to Ghost because
Really?
it was in your curated playlist of songs for Wayne, which accompanied me, during my hospitalization stay. I was listening to a lot of Ghost because of you.
Oh, nice. I didn't know that. That's awesome. I figured at this point everyone knew who Ghost was. They're such a good band and so bizarre. And even more bizarre that a band like them is as popular as they are. So they really dominated my year. I think in my general wrap up, the top 5 songs of the year itself, 4 of them were Ghost songs, just because they haven't stopped playing basically for 4 months in my house. I got into another band really heavy earlier in the year called Alien Weaponry. They're out of New Zealand, but they sing almost exclusively in Maori, and like they come from the culture
Wow.
to a degree, but they do it to kind of help preserve the culture itself, and are credited within New Zealand for keeping the language alive, because it was kind of dying out for a few years and it's kind of coming back. So really interesting band that I've been following a bunch. But then this is where my life gets super bizarre. Then there's this like kind of mid-year sort of time where I'm listening to a ridiculous amount of like Japanese music, and not necessarily even metal. So it's like poppy stuff like Kanabun, and let's see, Flow is in here. There, if you watch kind of anime, you'll know who those 2 bands are. They've been really big in the anime scene for a few years now. But it's a bunch of stuff like that. But then it starts going back into, Ghost, Cradle of Filth, then Steve Winwood. I was playing a lot of Higher Love on drums before my daughter was born for some reason. That became a jam. I don't know why. Not even playing the song correctly on drums, but playing to it. Did that like every day. It was ridiculous. So my life is a big amalgamation of strange when it comes to music. So this was kind of what my year looked like. A lot of spooky stuff, but then a lot of like really happy, weird stuff in the middle of it.
Fantastic. I absolutely love your playlist. I absolutely love your Songs for Wayne playlist. Specifically, music has this powerful element, right? It's just, when you're doing through your darkest period, like for some, when I interview a certain artist on my podcast, they will always, they still feel very astounded, how the power, the magic of music is able to even like turn a person who is like feeling suicidal to maybe decide not to do so because of a certain riff or, certain words in the lyrics that, they perform in the albums and in the creation. So it's like music has always been a big part of our lives. And I could tell, that you're at your authentic best self when you're talking about music. I mean, next to SEO, of course.
Totally. Sure.
But it's like running through your list is a great eye opener for me. And I just want to ask you about the story behind the T-shirt you're wearing. I think it's for the benefit of those CMOs who are still with us, right? They haven't left yet. What exactly are you wearing? What does that splatter logo? What does it spell? Yeah.
It was really funny when we were talking about doing this podcast. I was like, okay, I'm going to make sure to wear a metal shirt, because I don't typically wear a metal shirt on a normal day of work. So I was like, I'm going to do this for Wayne. Let's see what we can do. So I was like, okay, either Ghost or Mayhem, your choice. And you picked Mayhem, which is very interesting. So for those that don't know, and if you've stuck around, this is probably where you're going to end up exiting. Mayhem is a band from Norway. They started in, I believe, the mid 80s. That basically are attributed for creating a genre of music known as true Norwegian black metal. Basically what this does, it's a response to thrash metal and death metal, but kind of takes this almost elitist approach to making something really dark and thought-provoking, and it brings in a lot of occult themes, a lot of Satanist themes. But then there's also certain bands like Enslaved that actually talk more about like Norse mythology and kind of general Norwegian cultural themes. But this is what it's the most known for, is the not good stuff. And in the early 90s, there were a few murders attributed to the scene by a few members. There were several church burnings from some of the more radicalist members of the musical scene. that just took it way too far. They were a bunch of dumb kids that made some really stupid decisions to try and take their image a little too far. And that image is usually personified by what is known as corpse paint. So it's the white face with the blacked out eyes, just kind of trying to look very, very dead-like. But this is the band that was kind of attached to a lot of that controversy. And at the end of the day, if you really actually kind of listen to their current state and not necessarily the past members of the band or necessarily pay attention to some of the stupid crap they did as teenagers, they're a really interesting band and musically really bizarre. It's a type of music that doesn't pride itself in high fidelity and production value. The worse it sounds, the more people tend to like it. So I've always just found them really interesting. They're kind of considered the most sinister band in all of metal, which I would debate now. But I really like some of their stuff, and it typically, especially this time of the year when it gets a little colder, my wife and I tend to listen to a little bit more black metal around the house, especially from this shirt, which is from their live album, Live in Leipzig, where there's a portion of a song where the singer just yells out, "When it's cold." And so it's just kind of a funny joke that my wife and have around this time of year. So it just kind of ends up becoming a thing around the house. It's one of those things, if you take it too seriously, it always goes too far. But if you just kind of take it for face value and just go, oh, this is kind of bizarre, weird music, then it's all good.
This is brilliant. So I just love your story, and especially you were talking about this particular album, right? Live in Leipzig. Does it state in the album sleeve which club was that? Where's the concert venue in Leipzig?
Oh, I can't remember. So that's the real funny thing about this band. If you get any of their records, and as someone who went to school for design, this kind of drives me crazy. They basically will put all of their like liner notes and lyrics in a very small font, basically a gray on black. So you can't read any of it. It's ridiculous. So off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you what club it's in. I do know it's really funny if you are a fan of black metal or its evolution into more like modern things like Black Gaze, which are bands like Alcest and Deaf Heaven. They really like these types of bands. And there's a really funny What's in My Bag for Deaf Heaven, where they talk about playing the same club as Mayhem and just listening to this album leading up to that. So
the reason I asked, because I was in Leipzig a year ago to watch Godflesh, my favorite industrial metal band, who I think they were the pioneers when it comes to industrial metal as well. I think they were probably ranked the same as Ministry for popularizing that term industrial metal, right? That was way before Fear Factory and all these other great bands that followed, right? And I was in Leipzig. I remember I was attending a data analytics conference in Berlin. So it's like everyone was like partying, after the conference, right? They were like 5 p.m. Everyone was already drinking.
Yeah.
I was the first person to leave that conference, jump onto the train, and then took a 3-hour train ride to go to Leipzig. That's like 3 hours away from Berlin. And funny. I ended up in Leipzig, and the moment when I entered the club, the venue at the Leipzig, they just started playing the first song, Predominance, on the Pure album, which is my favorite Godflesh record, by the way. Yeah. So I didn't miss a single moment in that show.
That's awesome.
And I was very happy because I get to hang out with Justin K. Broderick and Dan Green from Godflesh as well. They were my heroes, during the early 90s when I discovered them through Nine Inch Nails. So it was a dream come true. And I remember the sense of belonging and camaraderie with the fans who showed up. I wasn't the only fan who traveled a long way just to see Godflesh play at Leipzig, Germany. There were tons of other fans who did the same. Because I think that was the only gig, in Europe at the time. And I still remember, I had to go back to Berlin the next day, right? And I need to find a place to crash. And the fans just generously offered me a place to sleep before my early morning train departs for Berlin again. So it was an incredible moment.
That's awesome.
That was my authentic best self, when I get to be with the other metal fans or industrial music fans, and we get to rock out together in a small club in the middle of Leipzig. So that's why I'm very interested in that particular venue. Yeah, it could be the same venue.
It probably is. Who knows? That's awesome.
Another band we need to talk about. I think we were connected also because of this band from Liverpool called Carcass.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
they finally released something, right? I think their best album is Surgical Steel from quite a long time back. And it's like listening to this particular EP that was released this year, I think on Nuclear Blast, if I'm not wrong.
I think so.
It reminded me, why they are known as the greatest British death metal band. And they created two of, I think, the genre's most popular subgenres, right? I think gore grind and melodic death metal.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think they're more attributed to grindcore than gore grind. I could be wrong, though. I'm newer to Carcass.
Because there are so many subgenres, right?
Right, totally. Have you ever watched Metal: A Headbanger's Journey or any of the content from Banger TV?
I did. Yesterday, I was watching 2 hours of Bangers TV just to prepare.
I was watching Banger yesterday, too.
Yeah, it was incredible. And they were like listing their top 10 albums 2020. So the strange omission is that Carcass is not there. Napalm Death is not there for some reason.
I
right?
know. I was really interested by Napalm Death not being included, too. I think Carcass made it onto... No, you're right. They weren't on. No, yeah, you're totally right.
I think maybe because they are more looking at refreshing that top 10 list with newer bands that they can root for and maybe give them some shout out. So it's always a good thing to see, like a new wave of metal bands come up, and probably, the sad thing is that they're replacing those pioneers, right? But of course, this is how it goes, right? Even for music. Not just in technology, the newer ones normally take that genre to even to a further distance.
Totally. Yeah, it's been interesting watching metal evolve over the last few years and how it's been accepted. And I don't know if this is just kind of a bias off of the algorithm of an app like TikTok. I love wasting time on TikTok, by the way. But there are a lot of people into deathcore that I didn't think would be into something as kind of intense as that. Like, deathcore is a huge genre now. I thought it had kind of died out, but I was wrong. Evidently, I'm just becoming the old man I'm growing into.
How old are you, by the way?
I'm 32. I'm not really that old.
You're not that old. I'm the old one here. I'm like you're older than you.
I'm old in spirit. I like to tell our friend Keith Good, who is the co-host of the podcast that I also run. We like to joke that the best part of home ownership is being able to yell "Get off my lawn" to the kids that run past. So I'm old at heart.
That's a fantastic story. And of course, I have a story about my shirt as well. Can you see my shirt, by the way?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's actually a gift from a metal fan whom I met in New York City earlier this year before the shit hits the fan, right? So earlier this year, Mr. Bango were doing this reunion gig, and they recently recruited, new members, but the new members weren't really new. Yan from Anthrax and Dave Lombardo from Slayer. They were the new members, new blood in the band.
Right.
And the funny thing was that I saw this friend of mine. Hopefully he's tuning in. I'll give him a shout out later on. He gave me this T-shirt because he knew that I'm here. I was there in New York City just to see Dave Lombardo. Yeah,
totally.
And Mike Patton, of course. And he brought with him in his luggage, a few metal band T-shirts, and he just passed the Slayer T-shirt to me. And to this day, I'm still super grateful to him, and I hope to one day reciprocate and bring him, his favorite Entomb shirt. I think he's a big fan of Entomb and a few other Swedish bands as well. So that's like one of the things about a community, right? They surprise you with gifts like that. So what's like the biggest or the most generous gift you ever received, either at a gig from a fan or from the band, for example?
Oh, that's interesting. So this was really cool for me. There's a band from where I'm from. I originally grew up in coastal Mississippi before I moved out to Austin, Texas. And there was this band called Atom Ship. One of my absolute favorite bands of all time. Were friends of mine and my father's. He's also big into music, the reason I'm into music as much as I am. But in my teenage years, they would practice pretty close to our house and would let us come over, and we'd hang out with them, and they would just kind of be cool and let us see the set, and then we would go to their shows, all that stuff. But they kind of became a somewhat big band. They ended up signing to Wind Up around 2004-ish. put out an album, fantastic album. Check it out. It's called The Crash of 47. Unfortunately, it's the only album that they ever put out commercially. But they actually were kind of starting to make some real big movement. And there was a couple things that they gave me that was really cool. The first one was at one of the practices, they played my favorite song. They let me sit behind the drum kit, which their drummer, his name is Chad Kent, fantastic drummer. There's a magazine in Japan that literally called him the next Neil Peart. Totally agree with that. He is there, totally there. Fantastic drummer. But they played my favorite song, which is very drum heavy. It's called Mothra. They played it again just because I was there, so I could stand behind his kit and watch him play. Coolest experience of my life. Then they gave me a couple of like t-shirts to wear, which I still have, and they're super rare. They're not worth anything, but they're emotionally worth a ton. I can't bring myself to wear them anymore because one of my really good friends in the band, Nathan Slade, he actually ended up passing away about 10 years ago. So it's one of those things, like I have the shirt, I can never wear it again just because they don't exist anymore. You can't find them anywhere, so nothing can happen to this shirt. So I have that, but I also have a set of drumsticks. They're Neil Peart signature sticks that Chad Kent played with, which was bizarre for him. He didn't play this brand of sticks. I can't remember what they are, but he played those sticks that night and gave me that pair of sticks. So it's kind of cool having your drum hero and your other drum hero kind of combined in a way to this really nice thing that I have. So I have that. I have a few like little signatures and stuff like that, but those two are what mean the most to me.
It's like all this generosity, right? It's either normally from the band members or the music fans themselves. They are always at their authentic best self. And it's like this unspoken rule of taking care of each other as well, right? Either at a gig or in terms of just the generous gifts that we give to one another. I think this is the reason why I want to spend as much time with those community as much as with my family as well. So it's like whenever we talk about community, we talk about music, it brings me back to one of these generous moments that I actually experienced from Mike Patton. Yeah, mm-hmm. Of course, he's a huge hero of mine growing up. Grew up listening to Faith No More. Especially Angel Dust album was like probably one of my top 5 Desert Island discs. And getting to meet the man himself is really thrilling, and it's a huge honor for me. And he was able to even just hang out and talk to me for a while, before he actually hopped to the vehicle after the gig at Brooklyn Steel in New York City after they played with Mr. Bungle, right? So he was even volunteering to do a TikTok video for me outside the gig.
Wow.
In that venue. Yeah, I was like asking him to talk directly to my phone, right? And one of these days I'm gonna have my face punched in, by I was my phone at the metal artist. And what happens is that he actually obliged, and he actually said something really funny, like chicken rice, because Singapore is famous for chicken rice. So that's his message for Singapore fans, And we're all like waiting with a bated breath when the Faith No More concert can come back to this part of the world. It was supposed to be like touring Australia and New Zealand earlier this year, but it didn't happen, right? Because the pandemic started. So which are the bands that you want to see, before you kick your bucket? Or before the band themselves kick the bucket?
Totally. So I just feel lucky that I actually got to see Rush before Neil Peart died and they kind of called it quits. That one of the most disappointing shows ever, just because the sound wasn't good, but the experience and the fact that my parents, before they lived out here, actually drove from back home to come to this show with me, because they were both big Rush fans growing up, traveled to see Rush. So we all saw Rush together. That was a really special moment in my life. But for me, it kind of keeps shifting of who I'd like to see. I'm one of those people. I'm a huge Coheed and Cambria fan, so every time they come to town, me and my wife go see them. And we were actually going to miss the show because it was right at the due date of my daughter being born, but they canceled it anyway. So hopefully we'll get to see it when they come back. But I don't know. I want to see Ghost. I for sure want to see Ghost. I keep missing them every time they're through. And I've hit this point in my life where I've missed so many bands. I missed my opportunity to see the original lineup of Slipknot. I only got to see the last lineup of Slayer before they called it quits. So, which was amazing, but it's just not the same without Hanneman and Lombardo. I finally got to see Tool after all these years, back in March, like a week or two before pandemic hit. So yeah, I mean, it's ever evolving. I'd love to see Cannibal Corpse one day. Especially because they just keep getting older, but they stay just as brutal, and I don't know how long that can sustain. I'd love to see Amon Amarth. They've become a really big band for me over the past couple of years, especially as my increased interest in Norse mythology has grown. That sort of thing has become big for me, and them and Tyr. Would love to see both of them live. I just thought of it. The one band I absolutely want to see no matter what is a Japanese band called Maximum the Hormone. They are the strangest band in the world. They mix pop music, punk, metal. They live genrelessly almost and are so strange, but have been huge in my life for the past decade. If you've ever watched the show Death Note, they do the intro and outro song in season 2. Insane band. They're one of the bands I would travel for. My wife and I want to go to Japan one day, and our kind of running joke is we have to make sure that we time it with when Maximum the Hormone is playing somewhere. So I have to see them. So I would say that's my biggest one. Everyone else is I really need to see them one day, but that band I have to see before I die or they die.
Every single band I just mentioned are the exact same bands I wanted to see before I kick a bucket. And we all know that we're running out of time, and we're also running out of time for this podcast. It's like already 57 minutes.
That's crazy.
Amazing.
This has been fast, man.
There's never enough time, you could just talk all day long just about a favorite band, favorite album, favorite song, even favorite passage in a particular lyric, that we have actually, took us, our company us through tough times as well. There's so many bands with all these great creations. And I also have to mention before we let you go, right? My answer for my bucket list band is a band that I would never be able to see anymore. And that's this particular band right here.
Totally. I wish I would have seen them so many more times than the one time that I saw them.
Yeah. One time, at least you had that one time.
I got their last show of leg 1 of their farewell tour in Austin, and it was insane. It was one of the coolest shows of my life.
I've seen snippets of that. I'm not sure whether it was you or someone else who posted it on your news feed, and I was like, how I wish or what I would give just to be in that venue, right?
It was amazing.
Exactly, and it was just a couple of months ago, before I flew to New York to see Mr. Bungle. Mm-hmm. They played with Ministry and Primus, and I think with Phil Anselmo as well.
Yeah, I think so.
And that was at the Madison Square Garden, and that's a venue that I always wanted to catch a metal show. And probably that particular last gig, right, the last campaign for this Slayer gig, show that they played at Madison Square Garden will be spoken about for decades to come, because just like how Led Zeppelin, right, in the song remains the same. Like there's always images and footages of Madison Square Garden and the audiences that were there in the mid-70s, right? So that's a moment that has already left us forever. Yeah. And I doubt there's any chance to see a reunion for Slayer, right?
I doubt we'll ever see that. I think they've gotten to the point where they're not saying why they're splitting up. Although I have a feeling Tom Araya not being able to kind of give his all because he had that neck surgery, so he's very stiff on stage now. I'd imagine that's kind of heartbreaking to him. So he used to be so, he moved so much on stage. I would imagine it's hard to kind of get in the same sort of groove, but his voice is wonderful now. But I would imagine there's some level of, things just not going great. They're kind of sick of it at this point. I'm sure some of why Lombardo left is playing into a little bit of why they're kind of calling it quits. But they sure as hell went out on top.
They sure as hell went out on top. And, so many bands or musicians that we look up to, they're all facing health issues right now, yeah?
Totally.
Not just Ozzy, but I think even Maynard James Keenan, he had COVID this year. And he revealed he had hip surgery, replacement surgery, because of the way he was always stomping on stage.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Kind of accumulate, over the years when you're doing multiple tours.
Totally.
With multiple bands, right? You had 3 bands, a Perfect Circle and Pussifer as well. So it's like the way he moved on stage, in a way, he's asking for it. But, that's the kind of sacrifice that he made just for music, right?
I can't imagine what's going to happen to George from Cannibal Corpse. How is his neck going to stay the way it is? If you've never seen that band, look up that man. His neck is massive. It goes to his ears because he headbangs so much. It's insane.
Yeah, just like Corey Taylor from Slipknot, he has similar thickness for his neck.
Totally.
Look how we have actually, changed our subject topic from SEO to the thickness of the neck. And because of our common interest in not just anything to do with digital marketing, SEO, but of course, our bucket list band. So, my dear friend, I'm hoping that this pandemic clears up soon in US so that I can come back and watch all our bucket list bands on tour in person live, and hopefully with you next time in Austin.
Hopefully.
I'm actually thinking of moving to Austin in the future. Hopefully I'll be your neighbor one of these days,
You should. Me and Joe Rogan can go hang out.
Austin, yeah. And me, my hero, Joe Rogan.
Yeah, totally. I'm there.
And of course, to hang out with you after a gig and have a few pints together. So
for sure.
Reluctantly have to let you go. Thank you so much for coming on to 2 podcasts today, the CMO Asia Podcast and Bucket List Band Podcast.
Absolutely.
So it's the first time ever I'm doing a hybrid podcast. Only possible because of Jesse McDonald. Who's
you did it well, my friend.
My favorite guest ever. So let's do this again in 2021 and just to check how are things over there.
Absolutely.
So you keep yourself safe and take care of each other over there, yeah?
You as well. Thanks for having me, sir.
Thank you, Jesse. See ya very soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Cheers.